After nearly 3 years, plus a bonus month for no reason, Stranger Things 4 is finally all available for streaming. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that overall I thought it was pretty decent. It had a lot going for it, but I have a lot of thoughts I want to share. Before I can do that, however, I should just say that I was planning on making a really long video dissecting and discussing the first 3 seasons. But then my computer became momentarily indisposed, and I had to scrap the idea. But I also don't want to go on discussing 4 without at least mentioning how I feel about the 3 previous seasons. So let's briefly do that, just to get an understanding of how I felt going into the 4th installment. Spoilers for Stranger Things 1 through 4 are ahead, you have been warned. I recommend watching Stranger Things 1 through 4, or at least becoming familiar with most of the characters before watching ahead. Instead of my usual method of walking through the plot and giving enough context to understand most of everything, I'm instead going to be sharing my general thoughts, and it would take far too long to discuss every single thing that happens or even introduce the rather large cast of characters. Stranger Things Season 1 was a phenomenal start. It has almost everything you could want or expect in a Netflix TV show. You've got mystery, child actors that range from competent to excellent, government conspiracy, bizarre imagery, a sprinkling of comedy, a complete lack of basic understanding of Dungeons & Dragons, sappy drama scenes clearly directed at teenagers and young adults, nostalgia bait, and of course, most importantly, Winona Ryder. Her performance elevates Stranger Things to an unbelievable level. For me, the entire first season is all about Joyce Byers and her desperation to save her son. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff going on, but the story of a grieving mother clutching onto the last possible shred of hope, only to realize she's right and literally cross dimensions to protect her child, is the emotional height of the entire series. The way the mystery unravels is both engaging and well produced. Watching the characters string together their knowledge is satisfying, and I particularly enjoyed the way the characters did their investigating. Then I watched the finale and it kinda sucked. Don't get me wrong, it's not all bad, but to say that it was underwhelming would be a massive understatement. It was super anticlimactic, even though the part where Joyce finds her son is decent enough payoff.
Come on, kid!
Will, listen to me, it's your mom. I love you so much, I love you so much, I love you more than anything in the world. Please.
It feels like most of the characters didn't really have much in the way of resolution, and the final battle is pretty bad. It's got everything from pointless profession of love, zero action or tension, a weird self-sacrifice death that gets bored of pretending it's a death before the episode is even over, but overall I think it's pretty great. The dialogue is hokey a lot of the time and the pacing is slower than it should be, but that doesn't outweigh all of the highlights on display. I especially enjoy the imagery using lights, and my favorite characters in order are Joyce, Dustin, and Jonathan. Good job, Stranger Things 1, you get an 8 out of 10. Next is obviously Stranger Things 2, and I'm gonna go ahead and rip the band-aid off right here. I do not like this season. In fact, I didn't finish it for almost 5 years because I disliked it so much. When compared to other stuff on Netflix, it's obviously not bad at all, and it gets better the longer it goes on, but it pretty much ditched everything excellent about the first season and focused on the weaker aspects. The mystery is far less engaging, the dialogue is worse, it feels like it's retracing its steps, and perhaps most annoyingly, it includes a character who very obviously gets introduced only to die for emotional impact later on. I like this character, but he very clearly only exists just so he can make Winona Ryder freak out about something. It's more obvious and easily predictable than the pig in Minecraft story mode dying for emotional impact. There's exactly one highlight of this season, and that is Steve Harrington. He goes from a character I was mostly indifferent to in the first season to literally essential in the second. His transformation is endearing, funny, and the saving grace of an otherwise extremely dull, scattered, and unoriginal season. It's not unwatchable, it's not awful, but man, it is a sharp nosedive in quality. My top 3 characters of this season are Steve, Dustin, and Joyce, and you better believe King Steve isn't leaving that spot. 5 out of 10. But if I ever rewatch this season again, I'll drop it to a 4 out of annoyance. Next is Stranger Things 3, the first season I didn't even bother watching when it first came out because I never finished the previous one. And that's quite unfortunate because this season is pretty good. It's a drastic improvement over 2, choosing to stick with a few good ideas 2 had and really running with them. It decides to spend so much time developing its side characters into members of the main crew that it actually kind of forgets about some of the main characters, and honestly, I think the trade-off is kind of worth it. The sheriff gets more development. Gee, I wonder why. Max gets more development along with her brother, and most importantly, Steve. He is once again by far the best part, with Dustin being a great pairing for him. But the fun doesn't stop there, as Erica Sinclair goes from a minor character with a few appearances in Season 2 to one of the best characters in the show, all because she decides to roll with these two. Joining them is newcomer Robin Buckley, who is best described as Steve, but even more of a lesbian than usual. On top of assembling the greatest quartet in streaming history, Stranger Things 3 very fortunately doesn't try to retread its steps. Much. This time the mystery is focused on espionage. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but at this point I had so much fun watching these 4 that I could tolerate the increasingly frustrating bits of romance and drama they'd shove between the good stuff. It kinda makes me hate most of the characters for a while, but fortunately it decides to undo most of the damage. This season takes all the whining clearly directed at younger audiences and cranks it up to 11. Unfortunately though, just like Season 1, the ending is eye-rolling. It ends with another pointless self-sacrifice that gets retracted in the very same episode. A second fake-out death, this time far more annoying. On top of that, it feels like the writers ran out of ideas for Joyce but still wanted her name in the credits, so they just kinda half-heartedly tried to find a reason to make her go all conspiracy theorist again. Still, the highs more than make up for it, especially with my 3 favorite characters in the season, Steve, Robin, and Dustin. 7 out of 10, closer to a 6 than an 8. And that leaves us with Stranger Things 4. I was looking forward to this one as I heard it was going to be pretty long and emotional. Plus they had several years to work on it, which means it should be the best one yet, right? Well, no. It's not the best, but it's by far the funniest, because I mean, how can you even remotely take scenes like this seriously when you're staring at this? It's pretty enjoyable to watch the bowl cut evolve over each season, but I don't know who greenlit this. For real though, let's actually dive into what I thought about Stranger Things 4. Even before things had really gotten started, I already disliked the entire plot of Hopper being stuck in Russia after the events of Season 3, because I am completely sick of fake-out deaths. I know that wasn't the fault of Season 4, but the previous season had already ruined itself by revealing he was still alive. But it just kinda sucks. But that's okay, maybe the plot of how Hopper escapes will be interesting. After all, it takes up a lot of screen time and gets treated with the same weight as the other parts. Unfortunately, no. It's bad. I liked the Soviet espionage in Season 3 because it was a new direction for the series. There had always been government conspiracies, but it was refreshing to see a new kind of mystery play out. Hopper mopes around and then does some stuff, and then mopes around, and then it repeats. There's also a Demogorgon, but honestly that's not very important. Neither is this whole side of the plot. That really sucks because Joyce is completely focused on it, meaning she's not involved in the action in Hawkins. Instead, you get your average plot about a prison break / heist with a shady person betraying everyone for a reward. Except this time, he actually changes his mind. It's all pretty pointless, but it's not unbearable. There's not a lot going on, and I feel like half of it could have been cut out. It also doesn't really contribute much to the other plots, which sucks because it's given nearly equal weight. It's by far the weakest part in Season 4, and we got it at the cost of undoing what would have otherwise been the only meaningful death in the series up to this point. I'm obviously not a writer, but here's just one idea I had for how to fix this mess. Stop with Russia entirely. It worked in Season 3 for a while, but focus on something else. Hopper just stays dead, a hero to the eyes of everyone, and more importantly, a way for Eleven and Joyce to come together. In the way things currently are, despite the two living together, it doesn't feel like their dynamic has changed at all. Hopper's death could have been a great springboard for them to develop a relationship. Instead, she just kinda dips and goes to Russia, which is a shame because I feel like there's a lot of potential there. Later in the season, 11 gets taken to an underground shelter while Joyce's kids go out looking for her, which is a shame because I feel like there's a lot of potential there. Later in the season, 11 gets taken to an underground shelter while Joyce's kids go out looking for her. It would have been a great place to include her. She could have an opportunity to get involved with the mystery, grow closer to her kids, and give Winona Ryder the chance to do her contractually obligated conspiracy mental breakdown.
And ask him what he's doing that's making my magnets fall off my damn fridge!
Not only that, but the pain of losing 11 like that would be a good way to draw parallels to the first season without completely redoing it. You could take everyone's newly developed state and put them in a situation they've already been through and see how things play out. Maybe Will is reassuring, saying how she found him and they can work together to find 11, like 11 helped Joyce find Will in season 1. But instead, she abandons her kids and flies off to go waste the audience's time. It's a shame because I think Joyce is the biggest weapon Stranger Things has, and they don't utilize her very well. Her plot thread is resolved when she reunites with Hopper, and together they get by with a little help from their friends. It's not terrible, just unnecessary, bloated, and a missed opportunity. The payoff of reuniting Hopper and 11 is absolutely nothing when compared to the way Season 3 ended. I know it's just a justification for Hopper to grow more as a character later on, but I feel like he'd already done as much growing as he needed to. His character had gone from addict and miserable to a budding romantic and adoptive father. Now that he's alive and out of Russia, I hope there will be more development of his character and relationship with 11. I genuinely like him as a character, but the path of getting to this point was a bumpy one. Every time Hopper's plot was on screen, I felt myself waiting for it to end before we got back to the other stuff. Murray was great though, loved that dude. But with that out of the way, I think it's time to focus on the positives for this entry in the Stranger Things canon. I mostly enjoyed the exploration of Eleven's backstory, and the fact that she had to trust people who experimented on her is actually interesting. It's all a bit standard and never surprised me, but it's hard to complain when the execution was frankly top-notch. Like everything in Stranger Things, it's a bit long-winded for no reason, but honestly it deserved having this much attention focused on it. Watching 11 come to terms with how she was manipulated, abused, and underestimated is satisfying because of Millie Bobby Brown's fantastic performance. She's always been really solid at playing her role, but seasons 3 and 4 really amped up the development of her character, allowing Brown to show off her acting ability. The conclusion to this side of the plot is very satisfying, but not perfect. Dr. Brenner getting weirdly aggressive just minutes before the conclusion was bizarre, but that doesn't impact what is otherwise a very well executed climax. Brenner, still wishing to test 11 and live vicariously through her abilities, carries her out of the secret base as it's being raided. A helicopter equipped with the worst sniper of all time misses an injured old man carrying a teenager several times before finally doing some damage. 11 decides to put a stop to that and destroys the helicopter in a pretty impressive fashion for a Netflix show. She turns back to Brenner, who, with his dying breath, pleads for her to absolve him of wrongdoing, or at the very least acknowledge she can see his point of view. 11, like a total girl boss, does no such thing, leaving Dr. Brenner to die out in the desert. On the flip side of this plot, we have Mike, Will, Jonathan, and newcomer Argyle searching for 11 and dealing with wacky relationship issues. I think this part of the plot is great and much needed. It provides a lot of humor and overall has a lighter tone that contrasts the grimy and darker stories well. You can't exactly ride around in a stoner pizza van and not have a good time. Plus, like I said, Will is there and... For real though, I do genuinely love the humor of this part, and I think the emotional payoff of Jonathan, Will having a breakdown in the pizza kitchen, is well executed. I also really appreciated the way Will's internal conflict was handled. Having him on the verge of tears while supporting Mike is sad and inspiring at the same time. He's clearly sacrificing his own interests for the happiness of his best friend and adopted sister, which is well done and tragic. In fact, it's so well done that I can, for a brief moment, almost not concentrate on the haircut. On top of that, the sillier exploits are much appreciated, but there's still plenty of other stuff going on. It ties in with 11's story nicely and ends up being completely satisfying while leaving obvious room for development, which makes Netflix happy. The other main focus of the plot revolves around the absolute Avengers squad of my favorite characters in Hawkins. This one has by far the largest amount of things going on, which is good because it's where the majority of the quote-unquote horror lies. Basically, the big bad this time around is a being trapped in the Upside Down who exploits the horrible inner thoughts of the vulnerable in order to get inside their minds. He forces his victims to hallucinate before bending their bones and giving them that post-Sadako visit look. He targets one of the most vulnerable people in the entire cast, Max. She has a lot of issues that previous seasons dove into before. This entire side of the plot is more or less an excuse for them to dive into exploring survivors' guilt and abusive familial relationships. It's again pretty standard and a little obvious, but nonetheless well done. It's interesting to see characters struggle with the reality that their abuser can't hurt them anymore, and whether or not they could have done anything differently. Along the way there's plenty to discuss, such as when Max entered creative mode for a little bit. There's also the quasi-love triangle between Nancy, Steve, and Robin. I'm not a super big fan of that, but that's just me not being invested in romance at all, preferring to watch strange things as opposed to completely normal ones. They all try their best to find out what's happening to Max, and she struggles with her lack of communicating ability and can only manage to write her feelings when faced with almost certain death instead of talking them out. I really like the way her character is handled overall. She's been a favorite of mine because of what she brings to the table. Along the way, Steve, Dustin, Erica, and Robin also prove why I love them so much. Oh yeah, also Nancy and Lucas are there too. They mostly take a backseat or are used as a highlight for the main focuses. Nancy exists to complicate the relationship between Robin and Steve, as well as the relationship with Dustin and Steve, which is unfortunately mostly abandoned this season. She's not a bad character, I don't dislike her, but she feels really underdeveloped this season especially. Lucas is basically solely in this season to hold up a mirror to Max, which is fine with me. He also has a part about chasing popularity that gets a lot of development early on and then is almost completely dropped until the end. He's clearly there just to force Max to come to terms with her own flaws. He's been a main character since season 1 and feels like by far the most underdeveloped of the main crew. He doesn't do much in the first season, being sadly neglected, and as soon as Max shows up in season 2, they basically stop all attempts to do anything with Lucas other than have him fawn over her. He has moments, but at this point it feels almost too late to do interesting things with him, since the web of character connections is really strong at this point, and he's been left out of most of them. Overall, when this part first came out, I found myself largely impressed. 2 out of the 3 main storylines were exciting and engaging, and my family was eager to finish it. But Netflix wouldn't let their biggest cash cow walk away without a double milking. Have you seen their stock prices? They released the first batch of 7 episodes on May 27th, 2022, and the second batch was just over a month later on July 1st. Now, why would they release them just over a month apart? The last 2 episodes finally came out, clocking in at over 3.5 hours when put together. That's longer than The Rise of Skywalker.
I'm the spy.
With a ridiculously bloated runtime like that, the finale better be worth the wait, and for some people, extra money for 2 months of a Netflix subscription. The 8th episode overall is pretty good, containing that scene earlier with the helicopter I was talking about. No real complaints there. However, the final episode of Stranger Things 4 takes all of the goodwill I've been giving it and puts it into a trash compactor. The writers of Stranger Things have never once managed to make a good ending. Every single season before 4 ends with the plot threads coming together in a satisfying way before it all gets fumbled at the goal line. 11 squares off against the big baddie, making herself vulnerable in the process. Then a character sacrifices themselves to save everyone else, except 2 out of those 3 times it got retracted. Then the characters all hug and celebrate that there will be no more strange things in Hawkins. Every single season it's pretty underwhelming, even if there is some payoff. Except with season 4, the writers cracked their knuckles and said, "We can do worse." 11 decides that she wants to enter Max's mind and square off against her former associate, who turns out to be the BBEG of the season, Henry. Meanwhile, the Hawkins crew decides to take the fight to Henry himself, despite their lack of knowledge about 11's plan. They armor up, square up, and roll out. The plan is essentially that Max will use herself as bait to distract Henry. Meanwhile, Steve, Nancy, and Robin will travel to the Upside Down and Molotov him, and in order to make sure they don't die along the way, Dustin teams up with newcomer Eddie to do a Doom tribute concert in the Upside Down. I suppose now would be a good time to mention Eddie. He's your typical punk rebel 80s teen featuring drugs, D&D, and rock and roll. He gets accidentally involved in the strange things by witnessing Henry murder someone and immediately running away. The writers use this as an excuse to address the Satanic Panic, a time when Pearl Clutchers would point at anything they didn't like and claim it was from the devil. Good thing we don't have to deal with that today. Overall, this is a pretty bad idea from the writers of Stranger Things and extremely surface level. They just say, wow, look, this kid's not so bad. See, he's just a regular guy. People are really demonizing him for no reason. And like, yeah, obviously. But there's nothing else beyond that. The whole town gets riled up and searches for him. There's no real reason for this, but it actually manages to get worse. From the moment Eddie appears, it's clear he exists for one thing and one thing only. He constantly talks about being the hero and how ashamed he is he ran away from his problems. I wonder where his character arc will lead him.
I didn't run away this time, right?
No. You didn't run.
Yeah, he exists as the obligatory sacrifice and only major character death. Except because he was introduced in the same season he dies in, they don't bother retracting his death in the same episode. Like Bob from Season 2, he doesn't have plot armor. And of course, he's the only protagonist to die in Season 4. It's so unbelievably easy to see coming and annoying. Remember, in the 4 seasons of this show, spanning over 24 hours of total watch time, 2 protagonists have died. Bob and Eddie. Both have died in the season they were introduced in and clearly only existed to make another character upset. Even when the antagonist main character dies, it's to make another character upset. They clearly don't want to kill off any of the characters because that will make fans angry. But they also know in trying to be a horror series that there has to be stakes, so they do the bare minimum and compensate. It's terrible in all 4 seasons, but here it's particularly egregious, and here's why. Eddie's death accomplishes nothing. In Season 1, Eleven dies to protect Mike, and everyone else, from the Demogorgon. In Season 2, Bob dies after unlocking the doors that were trapping the characters inside Hawkins' lab. Granted, he only died after reuniting with Joyce for maximum impact of his pointless death, but he was still vulnerable from saving everyone else. In Season 3, Hopper buys some time for Joyce to shut off the machine, resulting in his death. And now in Season 4, Eddie and Dustin have their concert, distract the Bat Things, and successfully make it back from the Upside Down. Except Eddie decides to turn around and take off on his bike, proclaiming that they need to buy more time, and like 2 minutes later is dead. His dying words are admiring how cool it was that he sacrificed himself to be the hero, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes. It's so lazy. They don't bother developing Eddie, and then kill him in the worst way, leaving everyone else unscathed except Max, who gets bloodbent. But because she's a main character, Eleven revives her, upgrading her from dead to coma. The show cares so little about Eddie that Dustin is left crying over his body in the Upside Down. They don't even show how Dustin got out because it doesn't matter. They milked all the emotional weight they could from Eddie's character, leaving his corpse to rot in the Upside Down. To add insult to injury, National News reports that the earthquakes near the end were Eddie's fault because he's a satanic cult leader rather than just a Dungeons & Dragons DM. It's so bad, despite the show's attempts to convince you that Eddie really died a hero and that you should care a lot about him. To make matters worse, this isn't the only terrible part of the finale. The climax is once again super anticlimactic, basically revolving around a bad guy monologue and repetitive use of force powers. Imagine if at the end of Revenge of the Sith, instead of Obi-Wan and Anakin doing this, they just took turns using force push on each other, while one of them monologues about how evil he is. That's the level we're dealing with here. There's no action, no tension, just using the same move over and over again. I'm just saying Eleven would be a Ness main. Steve, Robin, and Nancy torch Henry, causing him to just vanish from Max's mind. And then they tease that war is coming to Hawkins in the 5th and final season. I did not like this finale. I thought it was quite bad, actually. The writers yet again prove they don't know how to write endings. But that doesn't change that I actually came out the other side of Stranger Things 4 mostly pleased. I liked a lot of what they had to offer, and I can see why others think this is the best season. Every season has major flaws, some more than others, but this one delivered a concise experience that managed to end atrociously and mostly recover. The payoff of reuniting is fine. I still like the way 3 ended better, but I can't really stay mad. There's a good chance the final season will fix some of the issues I have with 4 and make it look better than I think it is right now. Or it'll be atrocious and I'll just appreciate this one more. I liked Stranger Things 4, and it's good to see that the show has pretty well recovered from the stumble that was 2 and managed to keep the train rolling. Thanks to my favorite characters this season, Steve, Max, and Argyle, there's a lot to love, even if I spent a lot of time in this video complaining. When it comes to something I enjoy but see flaws in, I find it's more rewarding to explain what could have been done better, while still appreciating what we have. I'm going to give Stranger Things 4 a 6 out of 10. I didn't like it nearly as much as 3, and not as much as 1, but at the end of the day, it's still pretty good. If you haven't, absolutely check it out, especially if the concepts interest you. I could go a lot more in-depth on my thoughts about Stranger Things, and I might in a few years whenever 5 comes out, but I think this is a good stopping point for now. As always, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As a fun little bonus, if you tell me what song to play while Henry is lifting you in the air, I'll heart your comment. It doesn't have to be from the time period Stranger Things 4 is set in, but I'm curious to hear anyway. Either way, that's all I've got to say. Bye for now.